6 crowns. 6 bodies the throne could not fix. History remembers kings for their wars, their laws, their conquests. It rarely mentions what their bodies looked like beneath the robes, or what those bodies cost them. Court painters were paid specifically to correct what nature had gotten wrong. And for centuries, their brushwork was the only version most people ever saw. These 6 rulers carried visible deformity into rooms full of people who were forbidden to stare. Some were mocked in secret, some were feared. One of them ended an entire dynasty simply by being born. Number 6. Ptolemy VIII, Egypt. 170 BCE, the Ptolemaic court called him Physcon. The word meant sausage, or potbelly, depending on the translator's mood. Ptolemy VIII ruled Egypt on and off for over 50 years, sharing and fighting over the throne with his own sister and brother in a family that treated marriage as a political weapon aimed at itself. By most surviving accounts, he grew so obese that he could barely walk without support from servants positioned on either side of him. Ancient writers described a stomach so large it hung past his knees. Wrapped in transparent robes he wore specifically to display it rather than hide it, court visitors from Rome recorded their disgust openly, describing a man who moved like something poured rather than walked. He did not care what Rome thought of his body. He ruled through 2 civil wars against his own family, murdered his teenage nephew, and had the boy's dismembered body delivered to his sister as a birthday gift, the head and hands arriving in a box while she hosted a feast. Egypt's own priesthood, dependent on royal funding, continued carving his image onto temple walls as a youthful, athletic pharaoh, decades after his real body had stopped resembling either. Meanwhile, the philosopher Posidonios, who visited Alexandria and reportedly walked beside him at official functions, described struggling simply to keep pace with a man who could barely manage a slow procession without stopping twice to breathe. Ancient Alexandria, a city built on Greek engineering and Egyptian gold, ruled by a man too heavy to stand without help and too dangerous to challenge for it. Number 5. Justinian II, Constantinople, 695 CE. Byzantine emperors rarely lost their throne quietly. Justinian II lost his in the most literal way possible. After a palace revolt led by a general named Leontios, his rivals dragged him into the hippodrome in front of a screaming crowd and sliced off his nose, a mutilation called rhinotomy, designed specifically to disqualify him from ever ruling again. Byzantine law held that no visibly disfigured man could legally wear the crown, a rule meant to end succession disputes permanently by making the loser physically unable to return. They exiled him to Crimea, then further to a Turkic Khanate, certain the matter was closed for good. It was not. Justinian spent a decade in exile plotting, marrying a Kagan sister for protection, and eventually raising an army through Bulgaria. 10 years after his mutilation, he returned at the head of that army, retook Constantinople through a hidden aqueduct passage, and executed the men who had cut him, reportedly keeping one former emperor pinned under his boot during a public ceremony, before ordering the execution. He ruled the rest of his reign wearing a solid gold prosthetic nose, bolted directly to his face, worn openly rather than concealed, as a permanent reminder to the entire court of what had failed to stop him. His second reign was brutal and paranoid, ending in his own assassination in 711, but the nose stayed in every account written about him afterward. Byzantine chroniclers writing generations later still described him primarily by that gold nose, using it as shorthand for a man who had turned the empire's own disqualification law into a personal insult he wore on his face for the rest of his life. The empire had a law for exactly this situation. Nobody had written a law for a man who refused to stay disqualified. Number 4. Richard III, England, 1483. For 5 centuries, Richard III was remembered through a single image: a hunchback king, twisted and villainous, murderer of his own nephews inside the Tower of London. Much of that image came from Tudor propaganda, written decades after his death by writers employed by the family that had killed him and taken his crown. Shakespeare's version exaggerated the curve into something closer to a monster than a man. Useful theater for an audience whose queen was the granddaughter of the man who had defeated him. In 2012, archaeologists dug up a parking lot in Leicester, on the site of a long-demolished friary, and found his actual skeleton buried without a coffin. The spine showed severe scoliosis, a sideways curve so pronounced it would have made one shoulder sit visibly higher than the other. though it likely did not affect his ability to fight or ride. It was real. Not the exaggerated hunchback of the play, but a genuine, painful curvature he lived and fought with, including at the Battle of Bosworth, where he died in 1485 after leading a cavalry charge directly into his enemy's line, the last English king to die in battle. Analysis of the bones showed 10 wounds inflicted after his death, including a blow that sliced off part of his skull, evidence of a body deliberately mutilated once it could no longer fight back. Isotope testing on his teeth also revealed a childhood spent in eastern England, followed by a diet shift toward rich food and wine in adulthood, a level of forensic detail no historian writing in the 15th century could ever have imagined would one day contradict their own account of him. The propaganda lied about the murders in the tower. The bones did not lie about the spine, or about what his enemies did to him once he was already dead. Number 3. Tutankhamun, Egypt, 1332 BCE. The boy king ascended the throne at around 9 years old and died before he turned 20, ruling during one of ancient Egypt's most turbulent religious periods, restoring gods his father had banned. For decades, his golden death mask, unearthed in 1922, suggested nothing but perfection to the outside world. Then came the CT scans of 2005 and later the genetic testing published in 2010, which told a different story entirely. Tutankhamun had a cleft palate. He had a club foot, caused by a bone condition called Koehler disease, severe enough that over 100 walking canes were buried in his tomb for actual daily use, worn down at the handles from real use, not placed there for ceremony. His parents were confirmed by DNA analysis to be full siblings, and generations of Egyptian royal inbreeding before that had already stacked genetic damage into his body long before he took his first breath. Researchers also found evidence of multiple strains of malaria in his tissue, likely the final blow against a body already weakened from birth. Statues and paintings from his reign show him seated while hunting and shooting arrows, poses normally reserved for able-bodied pharaohs, standing tall, quietly rewritten to disguise a body that could not stand comfortably for long stretches at all. A golden mask hid a walking cane underneath it. The empire buried both together and told no one for over 3,000 years. Number 2. Ferdinand I, Austria, 1835. They called him Ferdinand the Benign, a polite name for a man the Habsburg court quietly considered unfit to rule from the moment he was crowned. He suffered from severe epilepsy, reportedly experiencing as many as 20 seizures a day at his worst, alongside hydrocephalus and a significant cognitive impairment that left him barely able to manage basic royal functions without his council quietly doing the actual governing behind closed doors. The Habsburgs had spent generations marrying cousins to keep their bloodline and their territory consolidated across a continent, treating marriage as a tool for holding land rather than building families. Ferdinand was the accumulated bill for that arithmetic, a body that had absorbed the mathematical cost of every one of those calculated marriages before him. Court doctors reportedly kept detailed private logs of his seizures that were never shown to the public, while official portraits continued to present him as a composed, capable monarch. When revolution swept across Europe in 1848, his own advisors pushed him to abdicate within months, replacing him with his 18-year-old nephew, Franz Joseph, who would go on to rule for the next 68 years. Despite it all, Ferdinand was reportedly remembered fondly by ordinary Viennese citizens, who saw a gentle, harmless man rather than the political liability his own relatives quietly managed around him for 13 years on the throne. The family had married for power for 300 years. In Ferdinand, the power finally ran out of a body able to hold it. Number 1. Charles II of Spain, 1661. They called him El Hechizado, the bewitched one. Nobody at the Spanish court believed a healthy man could look like this by accident, so witchcraft became the polite explanation, and priests were brought in to perform exorcisms on a living, reigning king. Charles could not chew solid food because his jaw, the infamous Habsburg jaw, protruded so severely that his upper and lower teeth never met at all. His tongue was reportedly too large for his mouth, slurring his speech into something few people outside the palace could understand without years of practice. He suffered seizures, intellectual disability, and a body so weak that he did not walk until age 8 and could not read until well into his teens, kept largely hidden from public appearances by a court terrified of what his condition implied about the dynasty's future. Geneticists who studied his full family tree in 2009 calculated his inbreeding coefficient at roughly 0.25, a number ordinarily seen only in the children of siblings or a parent and child, the direct mathematical result of centuries of Habsburg cousins, marrying cousins to keep the crown inside a single bloodline. He could not produce an heir despite 2 marriages, and court physicians who later examined his remains reportedly described organs so deteriorated that some doubted how he had survived into adulthood at all. When Charles died in 1700 without children, the entire Habsburg line in Spain died with him after nearly 200 years of rule, and within months, the great powers of Europe went to war over who would inherit the empire his own body could no longer hold together. A conflict that would stretch on for over a decade and reshape the map of the continent. 6 kings. 6 bodies shaped by disease, mutilation, inbreeding, and war. Their portraits were painted to hide exactly what their skeletons, their genes, and their court physicians already knew long before historians confirmed any of it, and in some cases it took modern science centuries to catch up with what the bones had been saying all along. The crown does not fix the body wearing it. It just makes sure history eventually writes the body down. If one of these 6 deserves its own full episode, say which one in the comments below.